Hi, my name's Neil Saunders and I'll be speaking to you each week about trends and developments in the retail sector. I want to start off this week talking about something that's quite positive because there are signs that are coming through that retail is actually getting stronger as the economy gets stronger. Now, as we all know, we've been through a particularly torrid time, and it's to my astonishment that it's actually been 5 years since the onset of recession in 2008. One of the interesting things that we've done is have a look at what retail would have looked like if the recession had never happened. And the interesting statistics that come out of that is if the recession hadn't have happened, over the whole period from 2008 up until the end of last year, the sector would have grown by something like 14%, which is not bad. Actually, the reality is that it grew by about 7.4%. And the difference between those two things is about £22 billion. So you can see really clearly, just in those simple statistics, the difference between retail out of recession and the impact the recession actually had. But that's the past, because if you look at recent numbers, there have been lots of improvements since the start of this year. The first one comes from our own consumer confidence tracker. We speak to about 2,000 people every single month, asking them a lot of questions about their views on the economy and retail spending. And one of the things that we've seen consistently is an improvement in sentiment about where the economy is going. If you go back just to February of this year, the number of people who thought that things would get worse economically over the next 6 months were about 42%. Now, last month, that number was only 31%. It's still a large number, but it's moved in the right direction. But that's not the only indicator. There's lots of other things that are good as well. Retail sales are picking up. Some of the results from retailers are looking more robust. And there's a general sense of confidence in the industry as we go forward into Christmas. So it's possible that we've put the worst behind us. But it begs a question: what comes next? And actually, one of the things a lot of retailers are asking is, do we go back to normal? I think the answer on that depends what you mean by normal. If by normal we think about what happened before the recession, I think it's very unlikely retail will go back to those times, because actually that was an exceptional period. If you look at retail growth across that 10 years prior to the recession, in real terms, stripping out inflation, it grew by something like 4.3%. That's well above average for retail expenditure growth. Actually, it wasn't sustainable, because a lot of it was funded by debt on credit cards, debt from remortgaging, and a lot of it was funded by excess government expenditure, which put a stimulus into the consumer economy and allowed people to consume above average. So we won't go back to those times. The debt levels that consumers have, the debt levels that government have, just won't allow that sort of growth. But the good news is we will go back to some form of growth. It will be better over the next 10 years than we've seen over this 5 years of the recession. And by our forecasts, we're predicting about 2.6% growth every single year across the next 10 years on average. That's not that robust, but at least it is growth. One of the difficult things, though, is that, of course, even with that growth, retail remains a very crowded and a very competitive sector. We've got too much space. We arguably have too many stores in some sectors. So that growth rate isn't going to be enough to float all boats, and we're still going to see some retailers suffer. That's the painful part of the equation. The good part of that equation is that actually those retailers that survive are going to be very innovative. They're going to think very carefully about what consumers want, and that means from the consumer's point of view, we're going to have a much more dynamic, much more interesting, a much more competitive retail sector that delivers through for the things that consumers want. So I would say, looking ahead, it's actually a great time to be in retail, because not only are things now looking more optimistic, but it's a time when retailers can really think about how they're creatively going to make a difference for their consumers. And it's those that do that creative thinking and put their best foot forward that will survive and thrive over the next 10 years.